Hello, guys, and welcome to another episode of Air Tycoon Online. I believe this is episode 33, and we're back here on our new world. And yeah, this new world's doing pretty good, as you guys can see. Just finished the economic crisis. Our investments are coming through. And this episode's just really nice because Paris is going to be our new hub, and there's a lot of new things to do in this world. Now, I'm not sure what I really want to talk about this episode, but I think I'm just going to talk about the importance of service and advertising investment, along with all the things I've noticed about Air Tycoon Online 3, which make it probably a lot better of a game compared to previous Air Tycoons. Now, the first thing I noticed is the increased level of competition. Now, there may not seem like there should be a very big increase in competition, but there really is, because between Air Tycoon Online 3 and Air Tycoon Online 2, one of the biggest differences is, which might go under the radar, is a lot of the cities were rebalanced in how big they were. For example, in previous Air Tycoons, a world with a similar world traveler index to mine, London would be around 400. In my current world, it's about 450. New York would be around 400 business and tour, and in this world, it's like 450, 500 or something like that. Oops, excuse me. But basically what I'm saying is the big cities got bigger, but the medium cities got smaller. Cities like Phoenix in previous Air Tycoons, like Air Tycoon Online 2, could be as big as, 300 business, 300 tour. Whereas in this world, in Air Tycoon Online 3, it's 200 business, 200 tour. Same with Denver. Denver's been downgraded from about 600 in a 3,000 World Traveler Index world to about 400. Philadelphia is a little bit smaller. Boston is way smaller. Boston used to be around 700 for most worlds. Now Boston's more in line with Philadelphia and Washington. It's at around 500. Washington is about the same, actually. Washington is mostly unchanged. Toronto is smaller. Detroit is smaller. Cities like Rome are smaller. Moscow is smaller than in previous Air Tycoons. So, basically, a lot of the medium cities in the world are completely different now. Sao Paulo is smaller. Cairo is smaller. Other cities, you think even Amsterdam might be a little bit smaller, though not by a lot. And basically, all that was traded just for a little bit of size in the larger cities. Like New York is larger, Chicago's larger, LA is London's larger, Paris is larger. But other than that, the Asian cities seem to be the most unchanged. But on that note, I noticed Kuala Lumpur is much smaller than before, along with where else is much smaller than before? Houston and Dallas in the United States are smaller. I think Houston might be the same, but Dallas is definitely smaller. What else have I noticed is smaller? There's tons of cities. Basically, whenever I think of a few cities, I remember that one of them was smaller than it was back in Air Tycoon Online 2. And basically what that does is it forces people into the big cities, because the smaller cities are less usable, which forces competition. Now, what else changed that made so much more competition? Well, if you think back to Air Tycoon Online 2 and even the beginning of Air Tycoon Online 3, you could make stopovers in any way, shape, or form. Meaning, if you guys know how to make stopovers in Air Tycoon Online 3, you guys would know that you need to pick a city which is stopover enabled to be the middle city in your stopover. So, for example, I need to do a New York, Paris to Naypyidaw or something in Asia. That way, Paris is stopover enabled, so that route is allowed. However, you're not allowed to do a route like New York to Donetsk in Ukraine or something like that to Seoul. You're not allowed to do that kind of route because Donetsk isn't stopover enabled. Other good cities like Belgrade, Cologne, Stuttgart, Manchester, Glasgow, all those cities in Europe aren't stopover enabled. All those medium to small size cities in Europe, meaning we can't do stopovers that use the large cities in North America and the large cities in Asia very effectively. And that in itself basically made a lot more competition. Because of the fact you can't do those stopovers, you guys are forced to make stopovers in different manners or just fly direct, in which case you can't fill as large of a plane, or you have to use a smaller plane to do so in order to get 100% occupancy. So that made a lot more competition. Now, previously in Air Tycoons, I didn't even know what service did and advertising investment did because I never did any of it in Air Tycoon Online 2. It just wasn't necessary. I was able to get first place and stay in first place as long as I kept playing the game just by the best possible starting method, as you guys know, which is possible in Air Tycoon Online 2. There was objectively a best starting method, whereas in Air Tycoon Online 3, I'm not sure if there's an objectively best starting method yet. I may be yet to find it, but there isn't as clear of a best objective way to start, and there isn't a best objective way to play the game as it goes, from what I can tell. There's a ways to get close, but I cannot tell so far if there's a best possible way. And basically, what all that means is it forces you to do the advertising and service investments, which enable you to do competition. For example, my friend has somebody in his alliance who has 90 service level, and they fly 767s versus 747s, which have a higher satisfaction than the 767. And they basically compete like that in that way, and then they enable a code share. And what that does is basically what ends up happening is the 747 is making like 1K or 2K a turn, and the 767 is making 5 to 6K a turn because of that high service level. That's the power of those investments in this game, and it's relatively unavoidable because unless you're in a world with very little competition, like the world I am currently in, does actually have a very low service level, or competition level, but even so, it's just ill-advised to ignore services because it's too hard to run around avoiding competition, especially with the fact that once you have a hub, you're kind of stuck with it. I mean, you can delete routes that get overlapped, you can switch them to smaller aircraft, and you can do all of that, but you've wasted so much money in investments to unlock that hub. And once you have unlocked that hub, to close it again feels pretty bad. And if you do end up closing your hubs in some of the major cities in the world, where else are you going to go? I mean, all the stopover enabled cities, which are the cities you can open hubs in, there's not that many. You know what I mean? You can't just, the problem is there's a lot of cities with good numbers which are not hub enabled. Philadelphia, for example, comes to mind. Detroit and Phoenix come to mind. These cities are not stopover enabled, yet they have good numbers, so they're kind of wasted as cities. You'll find that a lot of routes to them aren't taken, even though they're pretty good, especially between them and other unstopover enabled cities. Like, you'll find Detroit to Milano is still available because neither of those cities are stopover enabled, so that route isn't even possible. Isn't that weird to think about? You can't even make Detroit to Milano as a route. It's impossible to make. Same with Phoenix to if Phoenix is stopover enabled, by the way, I'm sorry. If it is, I'm sorry, but like another route, for example, that's just not possible is like Fukuoka to Milano. It's just not possible. Fukuoka to any stopover unenabled city is impossible. You cannot make that route. Isn't that weird? There's just less routes you can make in Air Tycoon Online 3 because some routes just simply aren't stopover enabled, which prevents people from ever making those routes. Now, what I do wish you could do is I wish you could open a city in any like a hub in any city once you have 50 name value. I think that would be a more fair way to do it. I'm not sure why I can't open a hub in Shenzhen if I want a hub in Shenzhen, you know what I mean? What's wrong with my hub in Shenzhen? Why isn't Shenzhen to Milano a route I can make in the game? I think that is a pretty fundamental problem, actually, with Air Tycoon Online 3, which is that you cannot make routes to certain cities because it's simply not possible to do the connection. Like, as you say, I'm making Paris to Shenzhen right now. Why can't I possibly make Shenzhen to St. Petersburg? I mean, I'm sure in real life there's some people trying to fly from Shenzhen to St. Petersburg. Probably they're not going to end up on a direct flight. Like, they'll probably transfer in Beijing or Qingdao or some kind of hub of Eastern China, whatever the hubs for Eastern China or like South China are. But you guys know what I mean. There's so many routes which just aren't possible anymore in the game. People end up funneled into a lower amount of routes, which end up with much higher competition, which leads to the point where if you have better service levels than the other people, you can just overlap them and they can't do anything about it. It's almost disgusting. In this world, I'm not showing it right now, but I have a lot of 747s flying on competition routes. Oh, you can see it right now. Look at my London. It's being flown to almost every city in the United States. What that does is, like, I usually would never do that. I usually wouldn't fly from London to LA if there's 3 or 4 people competing on that route. But I can because I have a higher service level than them, so my plane fills and theirs don't. I talked about this in the last episode, but I feel like the way occupancy is done in Air Tycoon Online 3 is just different to the way occupancy is done in previous Air Tycoons. When you're competing, it doesn't seem to divide the passengers. It just generates more if your route is good, basically. If your plane and satisfaction is good. In previous Air Tycoons, like Air Tycoon Online 2, it would just, like, take an amount of passengers, split it, and then distribute based on price and that kind of stuff. But you can get a drink of water, but I'm not sure if that's the way it works in this Air Tycoon. On the other hand, in this Air Tycoon, in this particular world, in fact, there is no competition, as you guys can see. I'm looking at the world right now. I'm seeing Orlando, Miami, Rio de Janeiro. All those cities are on competition, and I'm just like, wait, what's going on? It's time to take all those routes. So that's really nice. Yeah, what else did I want to talk about? Oh, yeah, that's another thing I want to talk about is, like, obviously you cannot make as many routes as you could in Air Tycoon Online 2 anymore. They're just not possible. But that begs a question is because, as you can see in this server, I've been hubbing almost exclusively off European cities, and you can't see my advertisements, but I'll tell you guys, my advertisements are mostly in cities like Frankfurt, Madrid, and even Barcelona, or not Madrid, Frankfurt and Barcelona, just because they're the biggest cities in Europe, and those allow stopovers. Oh, and I'm doing Los Angeles in North America just because Los Angeles is huge, and I'm doing Seoul because it's huge and has low competition right now. So that led me to think, how can I use the plethora of routes from large cities in Asia to large cities in Europe? Because they're the most common kind of route, and there's so many of them. So that led me to think, how can I use them? And I think I have an idea. I think the best way to take advantage of all these routes is to do code shares with your allies. European cities, I would recommend doing stopovers to them, like London, Frankfurt, Paris, like etc. All those cities are in prime location to do stopovers. You can just make every single long-range route you make to them a stopover and upgrade them to larger and larger aircraft. For example, if you somehow end up with a great route on a monopoly, like say you have Amsterdam to Houston to as a freaking monopoly, then if you got really, like, can't find any more routes, you can upgrade it to a 747 and then even add like a DC-1030 to that route or something like that, but just leave it as a stopover. Because why not, you know what I mean? Yeah, it basically allows you to more fine-tune the size of the route you want. Like, for example, 747 and like flying directly wouldn't, I don't know, guys. I don't know what I'm saying, but basically what I am saying is you can use stopovers using all the cities in Europe, so that gets them covered. But you can actually use code shares, and my friend has been talking a lot about how his I just dropped my phone. But how his alliance has been using code shares really effectively to fight competition. Basically, what you do is you ask somebody in your alliance to open a hub in the same city as you, and then you make a whole bunch of routes, and you code share all of them, and somebody else will do the same for you. So let's say one person chooses Amsterdam and the other person, or not Amsterdam, one person chooses Seoul and the other person chooses Beijing. Then you guys take those routes to everything in Europe, and then you code share everything. And what that does is basically the code shares help you generate a bit more passengers. Yes, it's your airplane, you purchased the airplane, and you are paying the expenses for that airplane, I believe. Entirely, I'm not 100% sure of that's how that works. But then you can code share it to give it a bit of a passenger boost. I think that is how code shares work. You can imagine it as, instead of you're flying one large plane, you're flying a smaller plane instead, and it works. And same with your ally, even though, like, in theory, you're almost competing in a sense, because you're flying like two different routes on one route, because both companies are operating on that route. You're not actually competing, it's just like two companies operating a small aircraft. It fills up easier. I don't know why, but that's just how it works. So I feel like if multiple people did that mutually, it could be a really beneficial thing. However, I'm just a bit curious to know if that will work, because one thing that is very specific to this game is name value. How much effect does name value have, and how much does it cost to maintain? Well, let me take my London hub as an example. My London hub costs 60k per turn to maintain on my main account, with maximum invest, or maybe that's second to maximum invest, and it currently takes 40k to maintain on this world, with, I think it's 40k, or 40,000 k invest. So what does that mean? That means I think I have around 200 give or take routes to London. Not quite. I have about 160 routes to London. Some of them are 747s. Some of them are what's that plane called? 737s. Now, per route, the 747s aren't paying much. You know what I mean? They're paying 400k, not like 400,000k, just 400k per 747. For advertising invest, and it's the same for the 737s. Now, for the 737s, it's actually quite a bit, you know what I mean? Per route, 400k, that's not really great. But for the 747s, that's a really good deal, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost an unnoticeable amount of money for an amount of benefit that I think far outweighs it, especially in competition routes. However, overall, I'm not too sure if it's worth it, but from what I can tell is the amount you pay for the advertising in your city is based on a flat amount depending on the size of the city. So, for example, London has a very high flat amount you pay based on your service level. So, if you have 50 service level, you pay X amount. If you have 60 service level in the city, you pay a base X amount plus another Y amount, and so on and so forth. So basically what I'm saying is the higher your service level, the higher you pay. But also there's some component of it that's based on the size of your company, and I haven't quite figured out what it is. For all I can tell, it's based on the number of routes you have to the city. So, for example, if I have 10 routes to London, and I had 60 service value with a maximum invest, I might be paying 38k. But me with 160 routes is paying like 42k or something like that. Like, it doesn't seem to be a huge amount, which scales with routes. So basically what I'm thinking is the more routes you have from a hub, the better. And that kind of disagrees with the code share thing, because when you code share a route, it takes your specific customer service level and so on and so forth for your portion of the airplane. So I'm just curious, to know if that would ever work. You know what I mean? If it's worth it to do the code sharing or if it's not. I basically won't ever know. But anyways, now that I've gotten that out of the way, I guess I can finally talk about my world. Now, as you guys can see, I'm just, scanning around looking for routes. I don't know why I'm looking at London right now, actually. I'm making a nice route to London. That's not bad. Pretty good. That's a pretty good stopover. You know what I mean? The stopovers in general are really good in this game. Like, holy crap. But I still got a whole bunch of VO to make, and I don't know what to say. So maybe I might just leave the rest of this video in the dark, basically. I don't have much more I want to say. So yeah, I guess you guys can watch the rest of the video if you want to see what I do with the company. To summarize, all I do is I use all the 737s and use all the 747s. Basically, my strategy here is to use 737s because they do seem to be quite profitable, and make as many 737 routes as possible, and then use those 737s to enable myself to lease 747s. And it does seem to be working well because even just a few turns ago, I was making nearly 300K. It's just the downticks, plus the opening a new branch expenses that's lowered my profit right now. But it should, like, when I wake up tomorrow, be above 300K, or 300,000K, I should say. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. This is all I'm going to say. Just enjoy the rest of the video if you want to. If you don't, that's fine. Nothing really happens. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.